Tonight we follow a calm federal investigation through quiet streets and quieter conversations. A small social club, a few clean-looking businesses, and money that keeps taking the scenic route. No shouting, no gore, just soft tension, steady work, and one big pattern hiding inside ordinary life. Settle in, breathe slow, and let the city do the talking. Chapter 1. The File That Would Not Stay Shut. The air inside the federal building at 26 Federal Plaza always felt like it had been cleaned with the same solution since the 60s. It was not unpleasant, it was just very sure of itself, like the building had decided that people were messy, and the building was going to win. I was on the 8th floor before my coffee had fully introduced itself to my bloodstream. The cup was the kind that looked sturdy until you trusted it. I carried it anyway because habit is a strong partner, and because the night shift had left a note on the pot that said, in careful handwriting, "Do not." In the conference room, the fluorescent lights hummed in a steady tone that could have been a lullaby if you were the type of person who fell asleep in airports. A couple of agents were already there, arranged like chess pieces that had given up trying to be threatening. On the whiteboard, someone had drawn a rectangle and written Enterprise beneath it. The letters were neat, the idea was not. The Assistant United States Attorney Melanie Ross was at the end of the table with a yellow legal pad and the calm expression of someone who had read too many affidavits to be surprised by anything. She nodded at me as I took a seat. "Morning," she said. It was still dark outside, so I offered a small correction. "It is a morning on paper." That got one quiet laugh. It was not that we were trying to be funny, it was that we were trying to stay human. There is a difference. Melanie laid a folder on the table and tapped it once, like she was checking if it was real. The folder was thick, and it had the look of something that had already caused arguments in at least 3 offices. On the front was a label with a case name that did not mean much yet. She said, "This case wants to be an everything case. In our line of work, that sentence is the start of either history or heartburn." She opened the folder and slid a photograph toward the middle of the table. It showed a storefront in Manhattan, not far from Foley Square. The sign was plain, the windows were clean, the kind of place you could walk past 100 times and never think about again. You could also walk into it once and never quite leave, even if you made it back outside. "A social club," Melanie said. "The kind that sells quiet." One of the agents, Dan Leary, leaned forward. He had the posture of someone who had been told to sit still too often. "Social club sounds like a bingo night with worse snacks." Melanie did not look up from her notes. "It is a social club with a landlord that gets paid in cash, a phone line that has interesting patterns, and an owner who has not filed a tax return in a while. The city calls it a business. I would like to call it a question." The word question came out soft, but it landed heavy. We all knew what she was angling toward. A case that was not only about a single act, a case about a structure, a case about an organization that moved like one thing even when it wore 100 different faces. The statute we were talking about was famous for its boldness and hated for the same reason. It was designed for a simple truth. Sometimes the story is not con crime. Sometimes the story is the way many crimes hold hands and pretend to be a family. We were not there to say the word like a badge. We were there to earn it. Melanie leaned back and let the room breathe. The clock on the wall clicked with the confidence of a metronome. "Here is what we have," she said. "We have separate investigations. A trucking company in Brooklyn that loses paperwork the way some people lose umbrellas. A waste hauling contract that changes hands without a clear reason. A loan operation that looks like it belongs in a ledger from the 1930s except the interest rates belong in a nightmare. And we have intimidation that stays just on the safe side of what a hospital would need to write down." Dan whistled softly. "That is a lot of smoke." Melanie nodded. "Yes, and we are going to find out if it is one fire or if New York is just as usual functioning by luck." She looked at me. I was the lead on what we politely called organized crime, which meant I had spent enough time listening to people talk around the truth that I could hear the shape of it. I said, "What is the name?" Melanie flipped a page. The target group refers to itself by no single name, which is convenient for them and annoying for us, but we have a cluster of names. Vito Marzano, Salvatore Salmello, Anthony Tony Perez, a couple of others. They are not celebrities. They are not the ones on magazine covers. They are the smaller gears that keep the larger machine from squeaking. Machines are my least favourite kind of poetry. They do what they are built to do, even if people get in the way. Melanie continued. We also have something that might be our doorway, a cooperatively inclined accountant who says he has been keeping more than books. He is scared, but he is alive. He wants a future. He also wants to sleep. Dan looked at me again. Great. Another insomniac with a conscience. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like regret, which felt appropriate. We started to talk about procedure, about surveillance, about subpoenas, about making sure we did not push a witness into a corner and then act surprised when they scratched their way out. About the slow craft of building a case that could hold up in court, not just in our heads. In the middle of it, as Melanie explained the legal frame, I thought about how the city would look if you could see it the way we were trying to see it. Not as neighborhoods and streets, but as lines. Money lines. Phone lines. Friendship lines that were not really friendship. Fear lines that were. New York City is already a map of invisible things. You can sense it on the subway. You can feel it in who avoids eye contact and who does not. In who moves aside and who stays planted. It is a place built on the idea that everyone belongs somewhere, even if they do not know where yet. When the briefing ended, we had assignments. Dan and another agent would work the trucking angle in Brooklyn. A financial analyst named Priya Desai would start pulling bank records where we could, and map deposits that did not match the claimed income. I would take the social club, the phone patterns, and the potential cooperator. We stood up, chairs scraped, paper shuffled. The day was still not fully awake, but we were. As we filed out, Melanie walked with me to the door. You know what I want, she said quietly. I said, you want an enterprise and a pattern that a jury can understand without needing a dictionary. She smiled without showing teeth. Yes, and I would prefer that nobody gets unalived along the way. That was always the preference. The city had enough ghosts. Downstairs the lobby was wide and bright and full of people pretending they were not nervous. A couple of uniformed guards watched the entrance like statues with breathing. Outside, dawn was starting to tint the sky over lower Manhattan. I stepped onto the sidewalk and turned toward Foley Square. The courthouse was there, older and calmer than the chaos that passed through it each day. Around it, people moved with the steady pace of commuters, tourists, clerks, lawyers, and everyone else who made the city run. Somewhere not far from here, a door would open, and someone would walk into a social club to drink espresso and talk about nothing. Somewhere else, someone would cash a check and tell themselves it was just business. Somewhere else, someone would lie awake and count their worries like sheep. The case file in my hand felt heavier than paper should. In the car, I drove slow through streets that did not match the quiet in my head. New York City never truly whispers. It mumbles, it mutters, it grumbles. It is a huge machine that can be affectionate, if you do not ask too much of it. The social club sat on a block that looked ordinary. That was one of its strengths. Ordinary is a good disguise. People do not stare at ordinary. They save their attention for loud things. This block was not loud. It was composed. It had the kind of calm that can either be peaceful or practiced. I parked half a block away and walked past, hands in pockets, posture loose, eyes soft. The windows showed a dim interior. A couple of men sat at a table, heads close, as if the air might steal their words. Someone behind the counter moved with the familiar confidence of a person who had done the same motions for years. No one looked at me directly. That was also a kind of looking. I kept walking. At the corner I paused and pretended to check a street map I did not need. A woman walked past with a shopping bag. A delivery truck idled. A man in a suit hurried by, holding a briefcase like it might float away. Everything was normal. Normal does not mean safe. Normal means people want to believe. Back at the office, I met with Priya. She had a desk that looked like it belonged to a person who did not waste time on decoration. She had already pinned a few pages to a board, and she had the satisfied expression of someone who had found a math problem hiding in plain sight. "We have deposits," she said. "Not huge, but steady. Cash deposits that do not match payroll records, and transfers that run through a couple of accounts before landing in a construction supply company in Queens." I said, "That sounds like money taking the scenic route." She gave me a dry look. Money likes scenery when it is being watched. That was the thing. The enterprise was not a monster in a trench coat. It was a set of routines. It was habits. It was people doing a little wrong every day until the wrong became the way the world worked. I spent the rest of the morning on phones. I spoke to a utility company about records. I spoke to a landlord office about leases. I spoke to a clerk who said, "Sir, I cannot just give you that," and I said, "You are correct. I will send paperwork that will make you wish you worked in a bakery." Light sarcasm, steady voice, keep the day moving. By afternoon, I had an appointment in a plain office near Wall Street with the accountant. His name was Leonard Greco. He was not old, but his shoulders were tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. His hands were clean, his nails were trimmed, his eyes were the eyes of a man who had learned to read a room before he read a balance sheet. He sat across from me with a cup of water he had not touched. "I am not a hero," he said. I said, "That is fine. Heroes are expensive. I prefer honest." He blinked at that. Then he let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it for years. "They call it business," he said. "They say it is just collections, just favours, just fees. But it is not just. It is a web." I nodded. "Tell me about the web." He started small. That was the first rule. People tell you what they can bear. He told me about bookkeeping for a trucking firm, about invoices that did not match deliveries, about wages that got paid in cash and never showed up on paper, about a waste hauling contract that suddenly belonged to a different company with the same phone number. And then, like he could not stop himself, he said, "And they talk about the law like it is weather, like it comes, and you wait it out, and then you go back to what you were doing." I said, "That is a good description. But weather does not have a face. People do." He rubbed his palms on his pants. He did not smile. He did not joke. He was too close to fear for that. I kept my voice low. "Leonard, if you keep talking, we can try to make you safer. If you go back to them and pretend nothing happened, you will still be scared, but you will be alone in it. I cannot promise you comfort. I can promise you we will do this carefully." He looked at me, searching for something he could trust. That was always the hardest part. People think the hard part is the paperwork. The hard part is asking someone to step away from a world they know, even if it is a bad world, and step into a new world that feels like thin ice. He nodded once. "Okay." I handed him a pen and a blank sheet of paper. "No fancy forms yet, just the human part. Start with names," I said. "Who calls who meets who, where, when. The places matter, the patterns matter." He began to write. When he finished, the page had a handful of names and a handful of places. A diner in Brooklyn, a warehouse near the waterfront, the social club in Manhattan, a small office in Jersey City, a hotel lobby in Midtown. It was not everything. It was enough to begin. Later, as I walked back to my car, the city felt a little different. Not louder, not darker, just more layered, like a painting that you realize has more than when seen underneath. At home that night, I sat at my kitchen table with the file open and the lights low. My apartment was small and quiet, with a radiator that made noises like it was trying to participate in the conversation. I thought about Melanie saying the case wanted to be an everything case. I thought about Priya and her scenic route money. I thought about Leonard Greco trying to buy himself a future with ink on a page. The first soft rule of patterns is that they do not announce themselves. They show up the way dawn shows up, slowly, shade at a time, until you cannot deny it anymore. I closed the file. It did not feel shut. Chapter 2. The Map on the Wall. The next morning the office smelled like fresh paper and old coffee. It is an honest smell. It says, "We are going to try to make sense of things, and we might not succeed, but we will definitely use up a lot of toner." In the squad area, someone had claimed a wall and started turning it into a living diagram. There were index cards pinned in neat rows. There was string connecting names to companies, companies to addresses, addresses to other names. If you stared at it long enough, it looked like either the anatomy of a machine or a nervous system having a bad day. Dan stood in front of it with his hands on his hips. He looked like a man judging modern art. I walked up beside him. "It is beautiful," I said, "like a spider had a college degree." He pointed at a cluster of cards: trucking company in Brooklyn, waste hauling in Staten Island, construction supply in Queens, a couple of shell companies in New Jersey, and the social club right here, like a polite little knot in the middle. I said, "Polite knots are my favorite kind. They do not resist when you pull them apart." Dan turned to me. "Any luck with your accountant friend?" I said, "He wrote down names and places. He is scared enough to be careful, which is both useful and sad." Dan softened for a moment. "He cares about his own skin." I said, "Most people do. It does not make them villains. It makes them alive." We got to work. Priya brought in a stack of bank records that looked like they could support a small table. She was not smiling, but her eyes had the sharp focus of someone who had found a recurring decimal where there should have been a whole number. "Cash deposits on a schedule," she said. "Weekly. Sometimes twice a week. Always just under thresholds that make banks extra curious. The deposits go into the trucking company account, then move to a consulting company that appears to consult on nothing, then land in the construction supply business in Queens." Dan raised an eyebrow. "Consulting on nothing sounds like my college major." Priya did not react. "It is a classic layering pattern. The money gets washed by movement, then it gets dressed up as revenue," I said, "and the construction supply business." Priya tapped a page. "The owner is a man named Salvatore Mello, same Salvatore Mello on our list. He is the kind of person who owns many things, but personally possesses very little. He rents his apartment, he leases his car, his lifestyle is modest on the record, his record is what we call selective." Dan let out a slow breath. "So the money ends up with our guy, but not in a straight line." I said, "Nothing in this kind of work is a straight line. Straight lines are for geometry and people who sleep well." Melanie came by mid-morning. She stood in front of the wall map with her arms folded, expression calm, eyes moving quickly. She read the cards the way other people read the morning paper. "Show me the enterprise," she said. Dan pointed. "These companies, these individuals. We suspect the enterprise is the group behind them, using the businesses as tools." Melanie nodded. "And the pattern?" Priya stepped in. "Predicates we are looking at include fraud, illegal gambling, loans with coercive collection practices, and money laundering. Also possible extortion. We have reports of businesses paying for protection, though nobody wants to say the word protection out loud." Melanie said, "Good. Keep it clean. Keep it provable. Nobody wins a case on vibes." I appreciated her for that. Vibes are great for a playlist. In court, you need receipts. We discussed next steps. Subpoenas for phone records tied to the social club, a request for surveillance on specific meetings, interviews with business owners who had been paying if we could persuade them that the federal government was less scary than the alternative. After Melanie left, Dan leaned toward me. "Sometimes I think she enjoys telling people no." I said, "She enjoys protecting the case from the parts of her that get excited." Dan frowned. "Do you get excited?" I said, "Only when a printer works on the first try. It has happened once. I still think about it." He laughed, then sobered. "All right, you get the phone stuff." I headed to the wire room. There is a particular kind of quiet in a wire room. It is not the quiet of peace. It is the quiet of intense listening, the quiet of people holding their breaths so they do not miss a syllable. The room was lit by desk lamps and the pale glow of equipment. Headsets hung on hooks like sleeping bats. A technician named Rachel Hanley met me at the door. She wore her hair pulled back, and her expression was neutral in the way professionals learn to be. "We have the first batch of call records," she said, not content yet, "just the who and when, and it is already interesting." She handed me a printout. Names were replaced by numbers. Patterns were not. I traced the lines with my finger. The social club phone line was the hub. Calls out to a trucking dispatch number. Calls to a payphone near a diner in Brooklyn. Calls to an answering service in Jersey City. Late-night calls to a hotel in Midtown. Early morning calls that lasted under a minute, like a heartbeat check. It was a map made of time. Rachel watched my face. "You see it," she said. I said, "I see the outline. Like a constellation. You still have to decide which stars matter." She gave a small smile. "We will get there." Back in the squad area, I pinned the phone pattern summary on the wall map. The string now had more reason. It connected not just names, but behaviours. Leonard Greco came in again the next day, escorted carefully, handled quietly. We did not treat him like a trophy. We treated him like a person trying to cross a river without knowing how deep it was. In a small interview room, he set down another sheet of paper. He had written more names. He had added dates, not numbers, just descriptions. Last spring, around Thanksgiving, the week the news talked about a big snowstorm, he said, "I remembered the places. The dates are hard, they blur." I said, "Places are good. Places do not blur as easily." He swallowed. "I am not asking for mercy," he said. "I am asking for a way out." I kept my voice even. "Those are often the same thing, but you will have to stay honest the whole way. We will check everything you say. That is not an insult. That is how we keep you alive." He nodded, and for a moment he looked older than he should have looked. After he left, I walked with Dan down to the lobby to clear my head. The building was busy now. Lawyers with briefcases, clerks with bags of documents, people with faces tight from worry. Security treated everyone equally, which is to say, like everyone might be carrying trouble. Outside, the air was cold and bright. We crossed toward Foley Square, where the benches were filled with people eating lunches that had been packed at dawn. The city was doing what it always did, living on top of itself. Dan said, "You ever think about how the guys we are after probably feel normal to themselves?" I said, "Yes. They wake up, they eat breakfast, they complain about traffic. They tell themselves they're just better at the game than everyone else." Dan kicked at a crack in the sidewalk. "They are parasites." I said, "Parasites still think they are entitled to the body." He frowned. "That is poetic for someone who claims he only gets excited about printers." I said, "I contain multitudes. Mostly paperwork, but also multitudes." We went back upstairs. By late afternoon we had a short list of target locations for surveillance. A warehouse in Brooklyn near the waterfront, a small office in Jersey City that pretended to be a shipping consulting firm, the social club, a diner where meetings happened in booths like it was a harmless habit. We also had a list of businesses that might have been paying. A small grocery in the Bronx, a bar in Queens, a construction site that had suddenly hired a security company nobody had heard of. Dan volunteered to talk to the grocery owner. He had the kind of face that looked trustworthy, which is a skill, not a gift. I went to Queens with another agent, Marisol Vega, to speak with the owner of the bar. It was early evening. The bar was not crowded yet. The lighting was warm, the jukebox was silent, like it was saving its energy. The owner, a man named Joseph Rinaldi, wiped down the counter with a cloth that had seen better decades. When we introduced ourselves, his shoulders tightened. Marisol spoke gently. "We are not here to cause trouble for you. We are here because someone else has been causing trouble, and we would like it to stop." Joseph stared at the cloth in his hand. "I do not know anything," I said. "Paperwork says you might know more than you want to." He looked up, and there was a flash of anger, then fear, then resignation. He did not want to be brave. He wanted to be left alone. He said, "It is just a fee. They call it a fee. They say it is for keeping the kids from breaking windows. Like the kids are a storm they can control." Marisol said, Do they threaten you? Joseph hesitated. We let the silence sit. Silence can be kinder than rushing. At last he said, They do not have to say much. They show up, they sit, they smile, and you remember stories you heard when you were younger. I nodded. Stories are powerful. That is why we are here. We are trying to replace their stories with something else. He let out a humorless laugh. Like what? A government bedtime story. I said, something like that. Except with more forms. That got him to exhale. The tension in the room dialed down half a notch. We arranged a follow-up careful and discreet. We did not push him to sign anything on the spot. We did not ask him to wear a wire. Not yet. Those steps come with risk, and we were not in the habit of treating people like disposable tools. Back at the office, we added Joseph Rinaldi to the wall map, not as a suspect, but as a person caught in a net. We marked the payments he described. We added time windows. We noted the names he remembered, including Vito Marzano as the man who liked to sit closest to the door. A pattern is never numbers. It is behavior. It is repetition. It is the way someone thinks they can own a room without raising their voice. As the evening stretched, the squad area grew quiet. Phones rang less. People typed more. The wall map glowed under the overhead light, a strange mural of human choices. Melanie returned near the end of the day, coat on, hair slightly undone like she had been arguing with time. "Show me where we are," she said. We walked her through it. The phone patterns, the money trails, the witness, the businesses that paid, the places where the same names kept appearing, like a chorus that did not know it was singing. Melanie listened, then said, "Good. Now remember, the statute is not a magic spell. We still have to prove an enterprise and a pattern beyond a reasonable doubt. We have to show the jury how it works without making them feel like they need to go to law school." Dan said, "So we tell it like a story." Melanie nodded. "Exactly. A calm story, a true story. One that makes sense to someone who just wants to go home and eat dinner." After she left, I stayed behind a moment and looked at the wall map alone. String-connected cards like veins, names connected to places, places connected to acts, acts connected to money, money connected back to names. There is a point in every long investigation where the case stops feeling like scattered dots and starts feeling like a picture. The picture is not complete, but you can see what it wants to be. I thought about Leonard Greco wanting a way out, about Joseph Rinaldi wanting to be left alone, about the men in the social club drinking espresso and talking about nothing. I thought about how the city sleeps. It does not sleep like a small town. It sleeps like an animal with eye half open. It trusts itself, but not too much. I turned off the desk lamp, leaving the wall map in the dim overhead light, still visible, still waiting. Tomorrow we would pull more record. Tomorrow we would listen more carefully. Tomorrow we would keep building the story. For now, the office held its quiet. The machine hummed. The statute sat in the background like a steady promise that patterns can be named. Chapter 3. Predicates in Plain Clothes. The city offered a fresh layer of cold that morning, the kind that made you feel awake even if your brain was still in yesterday. On the elevator putt to the squad floor, I listened to the quiet symphony of briefcases knocking knees and people pretending they were not thinking about whatever waited behind their office door. When the doors opened, the wall map greeted me like a patient accusation. New strings had appeared overnight. Dan had been busy. Priya had been busier. Someone had taped a paper cup to the edge of the board with a note written in pen. "Do not drink this, it is decorative now." Dan was at his desk with a newspaper folded in half, not reading it so much as using it as a shield from the world's. He lowered it when I walked in and gave me a look that suggested we were both about to earn our pay. "We have a new complaint," he offered, voice low. "Small business, auto body shop in Queens." They just got a visit from two well-dressed men with a calm tone and a list of expectations. Of course they did. The enterprise did not need to shout, it just needed to be consistent. I set my coat on the chair and scanned the notes Dan slid across the desk. The shop owner had called in a way that sounded like someone ordering help without wanting anyone to hear the order. The caller did not use dramatic language, no threats recorded, no theatrical displays, just a request, a fee, a schedule, a promise that life would be smoother if the arrangement stayed friendly. Those are the moments that look small in isolation and become loud when you stack enough of them together. Priya appeared at the edge of my desk with a folder. She moved like she had already walked 3 miles in her head. Cash deposits again, she noted. Same rhythm, same careful amounts. And there is a new transfer destination, a travel agency in Midtown. Dan glanced up. A travel agency. For people who like vacations or for money that wants a passport. Priya tilted her head. If the agency were selling trips, it would have customers. It does not. If it were selling imaginary trips, it would have deposits. It does. The math leans toward imaginary. I took the folder and flipped through the pages. The names on the accounts stayed familiar. The business names changed like outfits. The addresses traveled between boroughs and over the river to New Jersey. But the behavior stayed the same, like a person with a tell they could not stop. The statute we were building toward was not about punishing imagination. It was about connecting the imagination to a pattern of crimes that were real, measurable, and provable. To make it work, we needed predicates. Not at suspicion, not at comfort with the story. We needed acts that a jury could hold in their hands like blunt objects. That morning we focused on the boring things first. Boring is reliable. Boring does not panic on the stand. We started with fraud. Fraud was not one giant lie, it was 1,000 small ones. A shipment logged twice, a delivery never made, an invoice that belonged to a different calendar, a check written to a company that did not exist in the way a real company exists. The kind of paper trail that makes accountants whisper in their sleep. Dan and I drove to Brooklyn to meet a dispatcher from the trucking company, a man named Eddie Kern. He had agreed to talk under the condition that nobody called it cooperating. He preferred the phrase, setting the record straight, which sounded better to his conscience. We met at a diner off the highway, the kind with chrome trim and coffee that tasted like it had been poured during the Carter administration. Eddie sat in a booth facing the door, and he kept his hands on the table where we could see them, fingers tapping lightly like his body was trying to count down to the moment we left. I slid a small stack of photocopies across the table. Shipping manifests and invoices, dates and routes, signatures that looked rushed. Eddie stared at them for a long moment. His jaw tightened. "Those are not right," he finally offered. Dan leaned in a little, elbows on the table, voice casual. "Tell her how they are not right." Eddie pointed at one manifest. "Truck number does not match driver, and we did not run that route that day." Another one, "The weight is too high. Our trucks would have sagged like old dogs." Another one, "The customer name is fake. I mean, maybe it is real, but I have never heard of it, and I have heard of everybody." I let him talk. When people see their own handwriting turned into a trap, they often start telling the truth just to escape it. Eddie explained how the paperwork worked when it was honest, how the logbooks were supposed to match the dispatch calls, how the drivers were supposed to sign for loads they actually hauled. Then he explained how it worked when it was not honest. A supervisor would hand him a sheet and tell him to scan it into the system. A driver would be told to sign a blank form and trust that it would be filled in later. A load would be recorded but never moved. A client would be listed but never billed, because the bill already had a destination. Dan kept his tone mild. "Who gives the supervisor the sheet?" Eddie hesitated. The hesitation mattered more than the answer. It meant he was calculating risk. He tapped the table once, hard enough to make the spoon jump. Sal Mello, or someone from his crew. They do not always come themselves. Sometimes it is Vito Marzano. Sometimes it is a guy I do not know, but he has the same shoes as Vito, which is not a real clue, but I am telling you anyway. It was a clue of a different kind. Not evidence, but texture. The world we were mapping was consistent down to the details that did not matter, and therefore were rarely faked. I asked about pressure. Eddie used careful words. No one had grabbed him, no one had hit him, no one had to. He described visits after work, polite faces, friendly tones, and the way his boss would suddenly remember he had a family to feed. Eddie described favors that did not feel like favors. He described the way everyone learned to look away at the right moments. That was intimidation without the theatrics. Sleep-safe words for an unsafe thing. When we left the diner, Dan walked slower than usual, hands in his jacket pockets. He is scared, Dan noted. I nodded. So is everyone who lives in a world where politeness comes with conditions. Back at the office, Priya pulled us into a small conference room and laid out a fresh chart. This time it was about the mailbox and the phone. We had subpoena returns on an answering service in Jersey City. The service handled messages for a dozen small businesses. Most were normal: a plumber, a small catering outfit, a dog groomer who apparently had very demanding clients. 2 were not normal: the consulting company and the travel agency. Both used the same answering service, both paid with money orders, both had caller instructions that told the operators to repeat messages verbatim and never ask questions. Priya pointed at the logs. Calls came in to leave messages at odd hours. Then, within minutes, calls went out from the social club line. Dan looked at me. So the social club is not just a place, it is a switchboard and a stage. It gave people a reason to come and go. It gave conversations a safe place to happen. It gave the enterprise a heartbeat. To turn the heartbeat into evidence, we needed content, not just timing. That meant authorizations, careful paperwork, and the kind of patience that can make even a calm person start arguing with a stapler. Melanie joined us later that day. She scanned the charts and nodded in that restrained way prosecutors use when they are pleased, but do not want to encourage us too much. You are building context, she reminded us. Now we need the predicates to stand upright. Fraud is promising. The next step is tying it to specific people. We also need something that reads clean. Illegal gambling, loans with coercive collection practices, laundering. Pick your path, but keep it provable. Dan muttered something about how his path always led to more paperwork. Melanie ignored that with professional grace. After she left, I sat with my notebook and wrote down the predicates the way you might write a grocery list, if your grocery list included the parts that kept a criminal enterprise running. Fraud, check cashing, gambling, loans, extortion, laundering. Then I wrote down the people on the edges, the ones being used, the ones paying, the ones who could become witnesses without being crushed by the weight of it. Leonard Greco came to mind, not because he was brave, but because he was tired. Tired can be a powerful motivator. It makes people step off the treadmill, even if they do not know where the floor is. I called his handler and arranged another meeting, this time at a quiet office away from the main building. Something about the federal lobby made witnesses feel like they were already on trial. Leonard arrived with a small paper bag of pastries, which was either a coping mechanism or a peace offering, maybe both. He looked like he had not slept. When he handed me the bag, his hand trembled slightly. I did not mention it, I just set the pastries on the table as if this were a normal meeting between normal people. We talked about loans. Leonard did not want to. He tried to steer back to invoices and bank entries, the safer territory of numbers. I kept my tone soft. Leonard, the loans matter because they show the control. How they keep people paying, how they keep people quiet. He stared at the tabletop, then he nodded once like he had accepted a bad weather forecast. They call it a favor, he offered. Someone needs cash. They help. Then the help starts charging rent. He described a small operator, a guy everyone called Tony Perez, who handled a lot of the direct contact. Tony had the manner of a friendly neighbor and the schedule of a man who did not sleep. Tony would show up at bars, small shops, job sites. He would ask about family. He would compliment a new paint job. Then he would mention the weekly number. If the weekly number did not appear, he would return with the same calm smile and a new detail about the person's life that he should not have known. No explicit threats. Just the quiet point of a knife you never see. Leonard explained the paper side. Loans recorded in notebooks that never left the social club. Interest rates that were not called interest, but service. Payments that moved through cash businesses, the same ones we already had on the wall. I asked for names of borrowers willing to talk. Leonard offered done. Joseph Rinaldi, the bar owner. He also offered a second name, a dry cleaner in the Bronx. I wrote them down and felt the case tighten slightly into shape. That night Marisol and I visited the dry cleaner. Not in a raid way, in a gentle, we are here to listen way. The shop was still open, fluorescent lights harsh on the racks. The owner, Mrs. Park, had a tired face and kind eyes. Marisol introduced us, badges shown briefly, then put away. Mrs. Park did not like badges. She liked quiet. We respected that. We asked about payments. She did not deny them. Denial takes energy, and she was conserving hers. It is like paying rent twice, she offered, voice small. One rent is for the building, the other rent is for peace. I asked who collected. She looked toward the back room like someone might be hiding behind the hangers. Then she gave us a name. Tony Perez. The neighbor smile, the weekly number. Dan was right. The enterprise felt normal to itself. It also made normal people carry fear like an extra coat. We did not push for a recorded statement right then. We offered a phone number. We offered a plan. We offered the truth that protection is not just a word in a report, it is a set of careful steps. As we left, Marisol looked up at the night sky between the buildings. Sometimes I hate how quiet it can be, she murmured. I understood what she meant. Quiet can be peaceful. Quiet can also be enforced. Back at my apartment, I ate one of Leonard's pastries and stared at my notes. It tasted like cinnamon and anxiety. I wrote a line across the top of the page as a reminder to myself. Predicates do not wear masks, they wear uniforms. They appear as invoices, money orders, schedules, and friendly visits. The work was slow. It was supposed to be. A case like that was not built with one dramatic moment. It was built with many small truths, assembled carefully so they could not slip away. When I finally turned off the light, the city outside continued its restless murmur. Somewhere, a phone rang. Somewhere, money moved. Somewhere, someone tried to sleep. Chapter 4. The Wire Room Lullaby. The wire room was never truly silent. Even when nobody spoke, the equipment made a low electronic whisper, like the building was dreaming in signals. The headsets hung in a neat row, the monitors glowed with timestamps, the logs waited to be filled with the kind of details that look boring until they become the spine of a story. Rachel Hanley met me at the door with a clipboard and a mug that smelled like peppermint tea. She always carried tea when the room started to feel heavy. It was her way of telling the air to behave. "We have authorization," she reminded me, tapping the clipboard. "Limited scope, specific target lines, no freelancing." "No freelancing," I echoed. "I like my career with fewer surprises." She led me to a station and handed me a headset. The padding was worn, softened by hours of listening. I sat down, adjusted the volume, and stared at the screen where call segments queued up like train cars. Listening work is strange. You spend hours hearing voices that do not know you exist. You learn the rhythm of their breathing. You recognize their laughs, the pauses, the little throat clear that means a lie is coming. You also hear a lot of nothing. Sports scores, complaints about food, arguments about parking, the ordinary wrapping around the extraordinary like paper around glass. That morning, the first call was from the social club line to the answering service in Jersey City. A man with a smooth voice left a message for someone named Vinny. The message sounded like it could be about anything. Tell him the package is ready. Tell him we will do it tonight. Tell him to bring the blue book. No shouting, no threats. Just code that was not even clever. Code does not need to be clever. It just needs to be agreed upon. I logged the call, time, parties, summary. Then I listened again to confirm I was not inventing meaning. Confirmation is a comfort and a discipline. Rachel moved between stations, checking levels, making sure every log entry stayed clean. She stopped behind me. "The blue book appears again," she noted. I nodded. "Leonard mentioned notebooks at the social club. That might be what they call it. Rachel gave a small smile. You know you are deep in a case when a colour and a noun make your pulse rise. It was not excitement exactly. It was that quiet click in your brain when the pattern adds one more piece. Later, Dan came in with a paper bag and a look of forced cheer. He set the bag on the counter like an offering. Bagels, he announced to the room. For morale, for brain power, and for keeping us from chewing on the furniture. Someone murmured thanks. Someone else took a bagel and ate it with the seriousness of a person performing a ritual. Dan wandered to my station and leaned on the divider, careful not to jostle anything. How boring is it? He asked. I pointed at the screen. I have listened to 8 minutes of two men arguing about a television remote. It is riveting in a very specific way. Dan grinned. Perfect. That means the 9th minute will be the one that matters. He was not wrong. The work trained you to stay patient on the dull stretches, so you could be sharp on the sharp ones. Just before lunch, a call came in that made the room feel a degree colder. A voice I recognized from earlier recordings, likely Vito Marzano, called the social club and spoke to someone we had labelled unknown male lass. Vito sounded calm, almost cheerful. He asked about the truck. He asked about the paper. He asked if Tony had collected from the bar in Queens and the dry cleaner in the Bronx. Unknown male lack confirmed. The words were ordinary, the meaning was not. It was the daily maintenance of control. Then Vito asked about Joseph Rinaldi by name. That detail mattered. We had spoken to Joseph. The Enterprise knew about him in a way that felt close. Vito mentioned stopping by soon to make sure everyone was comfortable. Comfortable. The word landed like a joke told in the dark. I made my log entry and held my breathing steady. Fear does not help. Clarity helps. I motioned for Rachel. She listened to the segment, then nodded once and walked briskly toward her desk. She did not run, she just moved with purpose. Minutes later, Marisol appeared with her phone already in hand. She had the look of someone who had heard the same thing I had. We need to check on Joseph, she offered quietly. I agreed. A welfare check, done carefully, not like a raid, not like a spectacle. We did not want to bring trouble to his door by our own clumsy footsteps. Dan volunteered to go with Marisol. He made a show of grabbing another bagel. If I'm going to be anxious, he offered, I might as well be anxious with carbs. They headed out. I returned to the calls, but my listening changed. Every mention of Queens made my shoulders tense. Every friendly phrase sounded less friendly. That is the risk of listening. You begin to hear the world as a code. You have to remind yourself that most people mean what they say. The target group was the exception, not the rule. At 2 in the afternoon, the wire room caught a different thread. A call between the travel agency and the construction supply business. Sal Mello was on one end, a woman on the other. The woman sounded annoyed. She talked about receipts. She talked about a missing invoice. She talked about the bank asking question. Sal answered with a smooth patience that sounded like control. He told her not to worry. He told her the bank would be handled. He told her to keep the books tidy. Books tidy. That was another clue, another phrase that matched Leonard's descriptions. It was not proof alone, but it was another stitch in the fabric. Rachel listened over my shoulder and jotted a note. We should bring Priya in for this, she murmured. Accounting language is her native tongue. An hour later, Priya arrived in the wire room with a notebook and the same intense focus she brought to bank records. She listened to the call and tilted her head at certain phrases, like a musician hearing a wrong note. Missing invoice, she noted. That suggests they fabricate after the fact. They move money, then backfill paperwork to make it look like revenue. And the bank had question. That means the financial institutions are noticing. That can be useful if we can align it with proper legal requests. I appreciated the way she could turn a vague conversation into a concrete investigative step. She made the invisible visible. As the afternoon faded, more calls came in. Tony Perez talking to a borrower about a payment. The tone was friendly, almost supportive. The borrower sounded exhausted. Tony offered advice about budgeting. Tony offered a reminder about the weekly number. Tony offered reassurance that everything would be fine if the schedule stayed followed. It was a lullaby with teeth, soothing words wrapped around obligation. I logged each segment: time, participants, summary, relevance. The work was methodical. It was also intimate in a way that felt slightly wrong even when justified. Listening to private conversations is not something a person should do casually. The authorization paperwork was not a formality. It was a guardrail for our own humanity. In the early evening, Dan and Marisol returned. Dan looked relieved and annoyed at the same time, which was his default setting when the world dodged a worse outcome. "Joseph is fine," Dan offered, leaning close so his voice stayed inside the room. "Shaken, but fine. 2 guys did stop by earlier. No violence, just presence." Joseph kept his mouth shut, kept his eyes down, waited it out. Marisol nodded. "He wants out. He wants to close the bar, sell it, leave. He kept saying he is too old for this, and he is not even that old. Fear ages people fast." I felt my jaw tighten. We had to be careful. Our investigation could not become the reason good people lost their livelihoods. The Enterprise was already doing that. We were trying to stop it, not add to it. I asked if Joseph would still talk. Marisol confirmed he would, but only with safety steps in place. No meet at the bar, no obvious contact, no surprises. Good, we could work with that. Back in the wire room, the calls continued. Not every call mattered. Many were pure routine. But even routine could be a pattern when it repeated across days. Near 9, a call came in from the social club to a number we did not recognize. The voice was older, gravelly, like someone who smoked patients out of a pack. The other voice was younger, respectful. They talked about a judge, not by name, and a case, not by title. They talked about making things smooth. They talked about sending someone to speak to someone. It was vague enough to avoid being a confession, clear enough to make my skin crawl. I flagged it for Melanie. The next step would be careful. We were not going to accuse anyone of corruption based on coded chatter, but we also were not going to ignore it. The law does not enjoy being mocked. By the time I removed the headset, my ears felt tired. Listening leaves residue. It is like smelling smoke after a long day near a campfire. You carry it with you even after you leave. Rachel shut down the monitor and stretched. "That is enough for today," she offered. "Your brain is starting to turn into a spreadsheet." I stood and rolled my shoulders. I thanked her, meaning it. The technicians did not get the glory, but they held the case together with precision. Without clean monitoring, we would have nothing but rumors. In the hallway, Dan walked with me toward the elevators. "You ever wonder if they get tired of talking in code?" he asked. I considered it. I think they like it. It makes them feel like they are smarter than the world, like they are the only adults in the room. Dan snorted. Meanwhile, the adults in the room are wearing headsets and writing logs about the color of a book. "That is exactly right," I replied. "It is not glamorous. It is just effective." Downstairs, the lobby had thinned. The guards looked bored, which was the best news you can get from a guard. Outside, the air had softened. The streetlights made the sidewalks look like calm rivers of concrete. On the subway ride home, I watched faces. People dozed. People read. People stared into space. The city was full of lives that had nothing to do with my wall map. I thought about the phrase comfortable. I thought about the way Tony Perez counseled borrowers like a friendly uncle. I thought about Sal Mello telling someone to keep the books tidy. I thought about the invisible pressure that kept people paying. The Enterprise relied on the fact that humans want peace. It sold peace in exchange for compliance. At home, I made tea and sat at the table with my notebook open. I wrote a short summary of the day in plain language, like I was writing to a future jury that needed to understand without being pulled into our jargon. We have timing, we have money movement, we have code words that match witness descriptions. We have targets naming victims by name. We have maintenance calls that confirm collection activity. It was progress. It was also a reminder. Progress increases risk for the people who are helping. I closed the notebook and listened to the radiator hiss. The sound was steady, almost comforting, a tiny machine doing its job. Somewhere across the city, bigger machines were also doing their jobs. We were trying to interrupt them without breaking everything else. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more logs, more small truths. For now, the lullaby of the wire room still echoed faintly in my ears, a calm tone carrying soft tension, the kind you can survive if you keep breathing and keep writing things down. Chapter 5. Money that takes the scenic route. The first rule of following money is that it does not like being followed. It is not a person, but it behaves like way. The moment you pay attention, it starts taking detours. The moment you think you understand it, it changes its shoes. Priya called it layering. Dan called it a shell game. I called it the scenic route because if you are going to spend your weeks staring at transactions, you might as well pretend you are seeing the countryside. We started the day in a conference room with the curtains half drawn and the table covered in paper. Bank statements, deposit slips, money order receipts, copies of checks, printouts of account histories that made your eyes feel dry just looking at them. Priya stood at the whiteboard with a marker and the kind of calm focus that suggested she could alphabetize a hurricane. The cash comes in on a schedule, she observed. The amounts are careful. Not too large, not too strange, just steady enough to look like a business doing business. Dan leaned back in his chair, steady enough to look boring. Priya nodded. Exactly. Boring is camouflage. I watched her draw arrows between boxes. Trucking company to consulting company. Consulting company to construction supply. Construction supply to travel agency. Travel agency to another account in New Jersey. Back to a different company in Queens. When she finished the first pass, the board looked like a subway map designed by someone who hated tourists. I asked about the travel agency. It had been a new wrinkle, and wrinkles were either clues or distractions. Priya pointed at the flow. It functions like a blender. Money goes in looking like cash, money comes out looking like payments for services. The receipts, when they exist, are generic. A consulting fee, a booking fee, an administrative fee. The words are polite, the purpose is not. And Dan gave a small grin. My favourite kind of fee. The kind you cannot explain without a headache. We needed more than the broad picture. We needed the touch points where the scenic route intersected with real people doing specific things. That meant pulling records that could connect transactions to meetings, meetings to phone calls to the social club, and the social club to the names that mattered. Rachel already had call segments queued and flagged for financial language. It was the only time anyone in the wire room sounded like they were reading a spreadsheet out loud. We listened to a short call between Sal Mello and an associate. It included references to a bag, a drop, and a stop at the agency. It also included a reminder to keep the books tidy. That phrase had become a kind of refrain. Priya made notes and matched the timestamp against bank activity. A cash deposit at the trucking company account happened within an hour of the call. A transfer to the consulting company happened later that afternoon. 2 days later, another transfer pushed funds to the travel agency. The timeline was not proof on its own, but it was structure. Melanie reviewed our notes and reminded us that structure has to survive cross-examination. She had the gentle patience of someone explaining gravity to people who wanted to fly. If we want to present this in court, she cautioned, we need the cleanest chain possible. Records, witnesses, corroboration. We are not making a mural for our own satisfaction. We are building a bridge the jury will walk across. Dan murmured that he had never met a jury that enjoyed bridges. Melanie ignored that and moved on. By late morning we had a plan. I would go with Priya to New Jersey to check addresses tied to the consulting company and the answering service. Dan would stay in the city and coordinate surveillance around the social club and a warehouse in Brooklyn. Marisol would keep working on witness care and outreach, because the people caught in this story needed steady hands more than big speeches. New Jersey was grey and cold, which made it feel honest. We drove across the river with the skyline behind us like a set piece. Priya watched the road with the same attention she gave spreadsheets. I asked how she learned to read money like this. She offered a small shrug. My parents ran a small shop. I grew up watching what happens when numbers do not match reality. Sometimes it is a mistake. Sometimes it is someone testing how much they can take. I nodded. That is a good education. We parked near Jersey City and walked to the address listed for the consulting company. The building looked like it was trying to disappear. No fancy lobby, no obvious signage, just a buzzer panel and a hallway that smelled faintly of cleaning fluid. Inside, the suite number existed, but the company did not. At least not in the way a real company exists. The door was locked. A paper notice was taped to it, half torn, with a phone number that did not match any listing we had. Priya glanced at the notice, then at me. "They are not trying to impress anyone," I replied. "They are trying to be real enough to be annoying." We visited the answering service next. That office was real. It had people. It had phones. It had an operator with a headset and a look that suggested she had heard every kind of strange request and filed each what under "not my problem." We did not barge in. We announced ourselves quietly, showed credentials briefly, then asked to speak with a supervisor. The supervisor, a middle-aged man with careful hair, was polite in the way people are polite when they are hoping politeness will protect them. We explained the legal request. We asked about the two businesses using the service, the consulting company and the travel agency. He admitted they were clients. He admitted they were odd. He insisted he had no idea what they did. He repeated that his job was taking messages, not inspecting souls. That was fair. Most people are not paid to inspect souls. Still, he provided logs, he provided payment details, money orders. Always money orders, always from different locations, always with handwriting that changed. Priya studied the copies and pointed at the serial numbers. If we get the issuing locations, we can see patterns. Even a careful person has habits. When we left, the supervisor looked relieved but also slightly offended, like he resented being reminded that his office was part of the world. Back in the car, I called Dan with an update. He had a low upbeat tone which usually meant he was running on caffeine and worry. Surveillance at the social club caught Vito Marzano arriving mid-morning, he reported. Stayed 20 minutes. Left with a small bag. Not dramatic, but it is something. I asked about the bag. Could be pastries, Dan offered. Could be paperwork. Could be the hopes and dreams of honest taxpayers. Hard to say. I told him we had logs and a likely phantom office. He made a low, appreciative sound. The case was tightening, and tightening cases make everyone feel both better and worse. On the drive back toward the city, Priya compared issuing locations from the money orders with our timeline. A few were in New Jersey, a few were in Queens, one was in Miami. I looked over at her. Miami. She nodded. A single location can be random. Repeated locations are behavior. We have two so far that trace back to the same area code, and the travel agency has a relationship with a bank branch in Florida, no huge but present. The scenic route had warmed up. 2 days later we were in Miami. It was humid in a way that made your shirt give up quickly. The air smelled like salt and engine exhaust and expensive sunscreen. The sun looked bright enough to be a warning. Our local counterparts met us in an unremarkable office that felt like it had been designed to discourage romance. There were no palm trees inside, just file cabinets and a coffee machine that seemed personally offended we expected it to work. A detective named Carlos Rivera welcomed us with a calm handshake and a look that suggested he had met many northern visitors who forgot the sun was not a friendly co-worker. "You look like you brought New York weather in your pockets," he noted. I replied that we tried to keep it contained. We explained the travel agency, we showed the records, we asked about the bank branch and the money order locations. Carlos listened and tapped a pen against his notebook. A steady rhythm. "That travel agency name rings a small bell," he offered. "Not much. They pop up on paperwork, they disappear, they show up again. You know the type." We did know the type. The type that existed to be a step, not a destination. Over the next day we visited the bank branch, under proper legal requests and with careful coordination. We met with a compliance officer whose desk was so tidy it looked staged for a catalogue. They were cooperative in the professional way, providing records and explaining how the agency account behaved. The account had deposits from multiple states. The account had outgoing wires structured to look like payments. The account had very few normal business signals, few payroll transactions, few vendor payments that made sense, lots of movement, lots of emptiness. Empty accounts are suspicious. Real businesses are messy. We also visited the address listed for the travel agency in Miami. It was a storefront in a small strip mall. The windows were tinted. The interior was dark. The sign was plain. Inside, the space was mostly bare. A desk, a chair, a printer, a poster on the wall showing a beach that looked like a promise. If you wanted to book a vacation, you would not start here. If you wanted to move money, you might. Carlos mentioned that the lease was short-term and paid through a third party. A third party tied to a company in New Jersey, a company tied to our answering service logs. The scenic route was not a scenic route anymore. It was a circuit. Back in the hotel that night, Priya spread papers across the bed in a way that made the room feel like a travelling office. I sat at the small desk and typed notes, keeping everything plain. No dramatic language, just facts. We matched Miami deposits to New York, calls we matched outgoing wires to meetings. We matched lease payments to money orders. Each match was a small click. Priya looked up from the bed and offered a rare smile. They are consistent. I returned the smile. Consistent people are easier to prove. Our flight back to New York was early. The plane cabin was filled with the soft sounds of people trying to turn travel into sleep. I watched the clouds and thought about how the Enterprise used geography like a tool. It made the story harder to hold in your hands. It made the route feel longer than it was. But distance does not erase patterns. It just forces you to work a little harder. Back in the city, Dan greeted us with a new stack of surveillance notes. His handwriting had slipped into a tired slant. The warehouse in Brooklyn was active. The social club had hosting hours like a restaurant. The same faces appeared, the same cars parked, the same small bags travelled in and out. Leonard Greco provided another detail. He recognized the Miami travel agency name. It was used for something he called back-end cleaning. He did not explain the phrase like a joke. He explained it like an apology. At the end of the week, Melanie gathered us in the conference room. The wall map had grown into something that looked like it belonged in a museum dedicated to stubbornness. We have the money movement, she observed. We have the communications. We have witness statements building now. We need to decide how we present it, and how soon we move to grand jury. The words grand jury made the room feel quieter. It was a step that turned investigation into momentum. It also turned risk into something less theoretical. Dan cracked his neck. I always like grand jury season, he offered. It is when everybody discovers their love of subpoenas. Melanie gave him a look that suggested she would not laugh even if she wanted to. Priya did not react at all, which might have been her version of laughing. I looked at the wall map one more time. The scenic route money was no longer a mystery tour. It was a story with repeated stops. Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, Jersey City, Miami, back again. We were close enough to touch the structure. That meant we were close enough to make the Enterprise uncomfortable. And uncomfortable enterprises do not act politely. We ended the meeting with assignments and caution. I left the building after dark and walked toward the subway with my collar up against the wind. The street lights made the wet pavement shine like black glass. Somewhere in the city, a cash deposit was being made. Somewhere else, a call was placed with code words and calm voices. Somewhere else, a tired business owner counted bills and tried to pretend it was normal. The money kept moving. We kept following. Chapter 6. The Grand Jury Elevator. The courthouse lobby was a place where conversations changed volume without anyone noticing. People entered with confidence and left with quieter shoulders. The marble floors reflected light in a way that made the whole building feel watchful. We arrived just after dawn, when the security lines were short and the air still carried a trace of night. Melanie met us near the elevators with a folder tucked under her arm and a coffee cup held like it was a vital organ. There is a rhythm to grand jury work that does not show up in movies. It is not fast. It is not glamorous. It is a long sequence of careful steps, each one designed to hold up later when someone tries to shake it loose. Melanie gave us a quick rundown in the lobby, voice steady, eyes scanning the room the way prosecutors scan everything. We are here to present the early spine of the case, she explained. enterprise, pattern, predicate acts that are clean. We do not oversell, we do not perform. We speak like adults who expect other adults to follow along. Dan stood beside me and adjusted his tie as if it had personally wronged him. I had never seen him wear a tie without looking slightly betrayed. The elevator arrived with a soft chime and we stepped inside with a handful of other people, most of them carrying folders like shields. The grand jury elevator is a strange little theatre. Nobody talks much, nobody smiles too widely. Everyone looks at the numbers above the door like the numbers might offer guidance. The ride is short, but the anticipation stretches it. When the doors opened, we walked down a hallway that smelled like paper and old airs. The room where we would wait had chairs lined against the wall and a water dispenser that made sounds like it was clearing its throat. Priya joined us with a binder and a calm expression that did not quite hide her fatigue. She looked like someone who had spent the week translating money into language. Marisol arrived next, carrying a small notebook and a patient, careful energy. Her job today would be helping witnesses feel less alone in a building that can make anyone feel small. Our first witness was Eddie Kern, the dispatcher. He came in with his shoulders tight and his eyes alert. He looked like he had slept, but only because his body had decided it could not afford not to. Melanie sat with him in a small prep room, not to coach him, but to make sure he understood the process and did not walk into the grand jury room like someone stepping onto ice. She spoke plain. You answer only what you know. You do not guess. If you do not remember, you say you do not remember. Nobody is grading your performance. We are building a record, not a show. Eddie nodded, hands clasped and unclasped slowly. I watched from a chair near the door, staying present but not looming. Law enforcement can look intimidating even when trying not to. The goal was calm. When it was time, a clerk guided Eddie into the grand jury room. The door closed. The hallway returned to its quiet. Dan leaned toward me. You ever notice how the quiet gets louder in these buildings? I nodded. Silence echoes more when people are nervous. While Eddie testified, Priya and I reviewed subpoena drafts. Grand jury subpoenas can be broad, but broad is not the same as sloppy. Every request has to have a purpose. Every purpose has to be tied to the case. We focused on bank records for the travel agency, the consulting company, and the construction supply business. We drafted requests for lease agreements, payment records, and any related documents that would show who controlled the accounts, not just who appeared on paper. Melanie returned to the hallway after a while with a neutral expression that was her version of approval. Eddie did fine, she noted. He stayed in his lane. He described the paperwork violations and the pressure without drifting into rumor. That was good. Rumor is the enemy of a case like this. Rumor gives the defense an easy target. Next witness was Joseph Rinaldi, the bar owner. He arrived with Marisol, who had met him 2 blocks away to avoid anyone noticing him walking into a courthouse beside government employees. Joseph looked smaller here than he had in his bar. The building changed people. In his own space, he had been a man trying to protect what he built. Here, he was a man trying to avoid being crushed by the machinery of justice. Melanie spoke with him softly, told him the same things. Answer what you know, do not guess, do not try to be brave, just be accurate. Joseph nodded, lips pressed together. His hands were slightly shaky and he kept rubbing his thumb over his knuckle, a repetitive motion like a quiet prayer. No one promised him a miracle. We promised him process. When he went in, Dan and I walked to the vending machines and bought coffee that tasted like the inside of a filing cabinet. Dan drank it anyway. I asked why. He shrugged. Habit builds character, he replied. Also, if I stop now, my body will call the police. We waited. In the waiting, I thought about the statute again. Not as a word, not as a headline, but as an idea that the system could recognize a pattern without needing to catch every single act in isolation. The enterprise depended on fragmentation. It wanted every victim to feel alone, every transaction to feel like nothing, every conversation to feel harmless. In this building, with their process, we were trying to stitch the fragments into one fabric. Joseph returned with his shoulders slightly lower, like he had set down a weight he had been carrying with both hands. Melanie gave him a careful thank you, and reminded him of safety steps. We did not send him out the front door alone. Marisol walked him back to his car in a way that looked casual. Casual is a form of protection. After lunch, Leonard Greco arrived. He did not wear a suit. He wore neat, ordinary clothes and an expression that suggested he had not stopped thinking since the moment he agreed to help. He carried his own folder, not because we asked him to, but because he needed to feel some control. In the prep room, Melanie went over the basics again. Then she shifted gently into substance. "We need you to explain how the books were kept and how they were adjusted," she reminded him. "We need you to explain who gave instructions, who benefited, and what you observed." Leonard listened, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. When he spoke, his voice was steady but thin. "I can explain the flow," he offered. "And the notebooks? And the schedules? I can explain how the weekly numbers moved." He stopped for a moment. His hands tightened on the folder. "I cannot explain why I stayed." Melanie softened her tone. "You do not need to explain why you stayed. You just need to explain what happened. Jurors understand fear more than you think." Leonard nodded once, like that helped. When Leonard entered the grand jury room, the hallway seemed to hold its breath. He was the kind of witness who could change a case from probable to strong, because he had been inside the machinery. Priya and I used the time to prepare the next set of subpoenas: phone record tied to the social club, records from the answering service, lease agreements for the Miami storefront, records for the warehouse in Brooklyn. Each document was a small lever. Enough levers, and even a heavy machine moves. Dan sat with his notebook open, sketching out a plan for the next surveillance operations. He wrote calmly, but his foot tapped. He hated waiting. He also understood waiting was part of doing this right. When Leonard returned, his face was pale, but his posture looked slightly straighter, like he had survived something and discovered his bones still worked. Melanie thanked him and offered the same steady next steps. "Stay in contact. Do not change routine suddenly. Do not make yourself a moving target by panicking. Fear tells people to run. Safety tells people to be predictable." Leonard nodded. Then, unexpectedly, he looked at the water dispenser and laughed quietly, a small sound. "This building," he observed, "has the best, worst water I have ever tasted." Dan smiled. "Welcome to federal hydration." Leonard actually smiled back, just for a moment. Humor does not fix fear, but it can pry open a little space for breathing. As the day moved on, Melanie presented parts of the case herself. She did not dramatize, she did not wave her arms, she spoke in a calm teacher voice, with clear language and a steady pace. She explained that the government believed an enterprise existed, functioning through apparently legitimate businesses and coordinated individuals. She explained that the enterprise engaged in a pattern of predicate acts, including fraud and coercive loan collection practices and laundering. She explained that the evidence would come from records and testimony and legally obtained communications. The grand jurors asked questions, ordinary questions. How do you know who controls the businesses? How does money laundering work in practice? Why would someone pay a weekly number if they could call the police? Melanie answered with patience. Because people are scared. Because the enterprise sells peace. Because the victims often believe no one will protect them. Because it is easier to pay than to gamble your family on hope. Those answers were not flashy, but they were true. Late in the afternoon, the clerk brought out a stack of documents, the first subpoenas approved. Melanie reviewed them, signed where needed, then placed them back in the folder like a person putting tools in order before leaving a workshop. In the elevator down, the lobby crowd had thickened. More suits, more folders, more quiet dread. The elevator doors closed. For a moment it was just us and the soft hum of the cables. Dan exhaled slowly. That went better than I expected. Priya looked at her binder. Better is good. Better is also loud. They might feel pressure now. Melanie nodded. They will. That is why we move carefully. This is the stage where the enterprise tries to figure out what we know and who told us. We do not help them by being sloppy. Outside the courthouse, the late sun cast long shadows over Foley Square. People walked their dogs. Kids ran after pigeons. Office workers carried takeout bags. The city was doing its best impression of normal. I looked back at the courthouse once. Inside, a grand jury had heard the early story. Not the whole story, but enough to understand that something coherent was being built. In the days ahead, subpoenas would land on desks, records would be produced, calls would be analysed, surveillance would continue, witnesses would be protected. The enterprise would sense movement in the air, like animals do before a storm. That evening, back at the office, Melanie sealed a thin envelope and wrote a name on the front. Not a dramatic name, a practical lot. A person in a bank compliance unit who might be able to help us interpret something that looked small but mattered. She handed the envelope to me. "Deliver this in the morning. Quietly." I nodded. Quietly. On the way home, the subway car rocked gently, and the lights flickered in a way that made everyone look like they had seen better weeks. I watched a man doze with his head against the window. I watched a teenager read a comic. I watched a woman stare at her hands like they were telling her a story. The case was growing. The city was still the city. Both truths lived together. When I got home, I placed my notebook on the table and wrote one sentence to end the day. Grand jury is not thunder. It is the first change in wind. Then I turned off the light and let the apartment settle into quiet, hoping that somewhere, in some small bar in Queens, peace would hold for one more night. Chapter 7. The Cooperator Who Missed His Dog. Leonard Greco had the posture of a man who had learned to make himself small in rooms where smallness looked like safety. That changed in tiny increments after the grand jury day. Not because fear had left him, fear does not leave quickly, but because he had done a hard thing in a serious room and lived through it. Survival builds a strange kind of confidence. We met in a plain office with blinds that stayed half closed, not for drama, for privacy. Outside the window, the city moved like it always did, indifferent to paperwork and consequence. Leonard arrived with a small notebook and a plastic container of something that looked like homemade pasta salad. He set it on the table and glanced at it like it might have been a mistake. I told him it smelled good. He looked surprised, then shrugged. "My aunt makes it. She thinks I am working too much and eating poorly." She is correct. Also, she demands updates. If I do not take food, she gets suspicious. It was almost funny. The kind of humour that happens when people try to pretend life is normal so they can keep going. A marshal sat in the background, quiet and watchful, not looming. Protection is more effective when it looks like it belongs in the room. Leonard opened his notebook and took a breath. He had been writing more. Not on names, details. Who stood where? Who liked which chair? Who got up to answer a call and who made someone else answer it? The small behaviours that are hard to invent and hard to forget. Priya joined us with a folder full of bank timelines. Melanie arrived a few minutes later with a calm face and tired eyes. The kind of tired you get when you hold a case inside your head like a puzzle that never leaves your hands. Melanie kept it simple. Today is about clarity. You are not here to impress us. You are here to help us tell the truth in a way that holds. Leonard nodded and rubbed his thumb over his knuckle. That gesture had become familiar. When he was anxious, his hands tried to sand down the edges of the world. He started with the blue book. "It is not always blue," he explained. "Sometimes it is green, but they call it the blue book anyway. It is the ledger for the weekly numbers. It stays at the social club. It does not travel except on certain nights." I asked about those nights. Leonard hesitated, then offered a small, careful answer. "Sunday nights. Sometimes Wednesday if there is a problem. They treat it like church. Not the holy kind, the schedule kind." He described the ritual: a small bag brought to the club, a notebook pulled out, names recorded in shorthand, amounts written with symbols, no full addresses, no full names, just enough for the people inside the room. Then the second notebook, the what he called the adjustment book. That was where the fake invoices got matched to real deposits, the book that turned messy cash into neat business. Priya asked how the adjustment happened in practice. Leonard explained it like a lesson, voice thin but steady. Cash deposit goes into trucking, transfer to consulting, consulting issues an invoice to construction supply issues a payment to travel sends wires out. Then, once everything lands, they backfill the paperwork so each step looks like a legitimate transaction. Priya did not smile. Her eyes narrowed slightly, which was her version of satisfaction. A consistent method is a gift to an investigator. Melanie asked the next question in a tone that kept it grounded. Who gave the instructions? Leonard looked at his notes. Not always the same person. Sal Mello for the money movement, Vito Marzano for the problem-solving, Tony Perez for collection, sometimes a man they called Nicky for deliveries. Leonard paused and swallowed. There is also a man who does not come often, older. When he comes, everyone stands up, even Vito. The room went quiet, not in a dramatic way, in a listening way. Melanie kept her voice soft. Do you know his name? Leonard shook his head. I do not. They call him Uncle sometimes. That could be literal, it could be fake. I never asked. Not asking is how people survive. It is also how enterprises thrive. We moved into corroboration. Priya placed record copies on the table and asked Leonard to match them to events. He identified weeks when big deposits aligned with certain meetings. He pointed out a time in early spring when a sudden spike in money movement followed a dispute with a business owner who wanted to stop paying. Leonard did not describe anything graphic. He did not need to. He described the after effects. A nervous owner, a sudden desire to comply, a conversation at the social club where someone joked about how people get grateful when you remind them of consequences. The word consequences sounded harmless. It was not. Melanie watched Leonard carefully. She asked him about his own role. Leonard did not try to paint himself as innocent. He handled books, he processed transfers, he wrote invoices. He was not a bystander. He was a cog. He also looked like a man who had realized he did not want to be a cog anymore. After the meeting, Marisol walked Leonard out through a side exit. Quiet steps, no sharp turns, no patterns that could be watched easily. Even small precautions can carry comfort. Dan had been on surveillance duty and met me later at the office. He looked like he had been living on coffee and spite. He dropped a notebook on my desk. Social club had a busy afternoon. Sal and Vito both came through, Tony too. And we saw a car we have not logged before. Dark sedan, plates out of state, parked for 10 minutes, left. Priya looked up from her desk across the room. Out-of-state plates matched the travel agency pattern. Florida, New Jersey, sometimes Nevada. Dan leaned on the doorway. The scenic route has a vacation package now. Melanie convened a short meeting in the conference room. No speeches, just a plan. We had subpoenas coming back. We had wire segments building. We had witness statements thickening. We had Leonard giving us the internal ledger structure. The case was reaching a point where the enterprise would feel the tightening. Melanie wanted safety first. Witness plans reviewed, contact protocols reinforced, no casual drop-ins, no improvisation. Then she looked at Leonard, not present, but present in the room through the work he had done. We need to move him, she noted. Dan frowned. He is already in a temporary spot. Melanie acknowledged that. Temporary is temporary. We need something more stable, something that is not just a different address, a different pattern. We can coordinate with marshals for longer-term placement. I asked about timing. I did not ask like a person rushing. I asked like a person trying to keep the calendar from becoming a weapon used against us. Melanie gave the answer we already sensed. The closer we get to indictment, the more pressure increases. That pressure lands on witnesses first. It was the cruel logic of the enterprise. It could not punch the courthouse. It could not intimidate the bank records. It could not scare the statute. It could only lean on people. That afternoon I met Leonard again, this time in a vehicle with tinted windows. A marshal drove. The route was not direct. Direct routes are for people who do not have to worry. Leonard sat beside me and stared out the window as if the city might explain itself. He spoke quietly. I miss my dog. The sentence landed like something too normal for this context. That made it heavier. What kind of dog? I asked. A mutt, he replied. Half of everything, mostly ears. He snores like a truck. I named him Walter because he looks like a Walter, and because I always wanted to say, "Walter, you are making poor choices," and have it sound affectionate. I smiled, then kept my face neutral. The story had to stay calm. "Where is Walter now?" I asked. "With my sister," Leonard answered. "She thinks I am on a work trip. She sends me pictures. He looks at the door like he is waiting for me to come back. I cannot explain it. I cannot visit. I can barely call. I did not realize how much a dog can make you feel like you belong somewhere." He swallowed hard. The marshal kept driving, eyes forward. "I did not offer false comfort. I offered the truth I could offer. You are doing this so you can go back to that," I told him. "Not tomorrow, not easily, but eventually." Leonard nodded slowly. He did not look convinced. He looked like a man choosing between two painful options and trying to pick the one that still had a future. We arrived at a safe location for a check-in. Inside, a case manager reviewed basics. New phone, new routines. Do not post, do not tell, do not get nostalgic in public. Nostalgia makes people do careless things. Leonard listened, then asked the question that had been hovering like smoke. "If they find me, what happens?" The case manager kept the answer simple and sleep safe. "We do everything we can to prevent that. We have plans. You help by following them." Leonard accepted it. People in his situation learn to accept limited control. That is the price. Back at the office, Priya had built a tighter financial narrative. She pulled out a timeline that aligned money deposits with collection activity. She used wire segments for anchors, and she used bank records for weight. Her timeline did not rely on poetic words, it relied on repeated behavior. She pointed to wine cluster. This week shows a surge in deposits, then wires out to Miami, then a gap. That gap is when they create invoices after the fact. We can subpoena the printing logs from the travel agency office equipment if we can tie it properly. Printers keep secrets. Dan laughed under his breath. Finally, a use for printers besides disappointment. We also had something else. A bank compliance officer had flagged certain structured transactions months ago and filed reports. Those reports were now part of our record. It was not a confession. It was a sign that the financial system itself had noticed the pattern and marked it as odd. Melanie approved the next grand jury presentation. More records, more witnesses, a calm trace of how fear turned into payments, and payments turned into deposits, and deposits turned into layers. The enterprise continued living its ordinary life while we assembled its anatomy. That evening, Marisol called with an update about Joseph Rinaldi. He had decided not to sell the bar yet, not because he felt safe, because he felt seen. He had taken the first step towards speaking, and it had not shattered his life overnight. That mattered. Small hopes matter. They stick. The next morning brought a new wire segment. Tony Perez on the phone with someone about a late payment. Tony used the same neighbor tone, the same gentle coaching, the same reminder that schedules are important. At the end, Tony made a small joke about how everyone is busy, but some people get busier if they forget to be respectful. It was a threat delivered like a wink. I logged it and took a breath. The call did not name Leonard. It did not name Joseph. It did not name the dry cleaner. It was general. That generalness was a kind of confidence. Confidence can be the best evidence of control. In the afternoon, I visited the social club neighborhood again. Not as a dramatic stakeout, just as a person walking a city block. The storefront looked the same, calm, ordinary, clean windows, dim interior. Two men stepped outside, laughing quietly. One lit a cigarette. They looked like any two men enjoying a moment of air. Then a third man stepped out behind them and scanned the street with a glance that lasted less than a second. He did not look panicked. He did not look angry. He looked alert, like an animal that knows the woods. The men went back inside. The street remained ordinary. Back at home, I wrote my notes and thought again about Leonard and Walter. The enterprise took many things from people. Money, peace, sleep. When someone starts cooperating, it also takes the simple things, like walking a dog in the evening without looking over your shoulder. That night, I did not dream of gunfire or car chases. I dreamed of papers. Not scary papers, just endless stacks that never stopped coming. In the morning, the case would keep moving, the grand jury would keep listening, the enterprise would keep pretending the world belonged to it. Leonard would keep missing his dog, and somewhere in the city, a mutt named Walter would keep looking at a door, waiting for a sound that meant home had returned. Chapter 8. Indictment Day, Softly. Indictment Day did not feel like a parade, felt like a careful morning in winter, when the air is crisp and every step sounds too loud. We gathered at 26 Federal Plaza before dawn, not in a dramatic lineup, just a small group moving through hallways with coffee cups and folders, faces calm, voices low. Melanie had a stack of papers that looked ordinary and powerful at the same time. The indictment itself was the kind of document that turns a story into a formal accusation. Pages of names, businesses, acts, dates written out in careful language, no poetry, no rage, just a record of what the government alleged and intended to prove. Dan checked his gear in a way that suggested he wanted to look busy so he would not have to feel anything. Priya held her binder tight to her chest. Marisol reviewed a list of witness contact steps more time, like repeating a safety mantra. I watched the clock and tried to keep my breathing even. This was a step forward, but it was also a step into the open. Once indictments are unsealed, the enterprise stops guessing. It starts reacting. The plan for the morning was simple on paper. Execute arrest warrants, secure key locations, serve search warrants where authorized, keep everyone safe, keep everything clean. In real life, simple plans have edges. We met with the teams assigned to each location. Brooklyn Warehouse, Queens Construction Supply Business, the Social Club in Manhattan, a Jersey City office tied to the consulting company, a small apartment where Tony Perez was believed to sleep when he slept. The briefings were short and calm, no chest thumping, no talk of war. This was law enforcement, not theatre. Melanie reminded everyone of the tone. Professional, respectful, minimal disruption. We are not here to punish a neighborhood. We are here to execute lawful process. At first light, I joined the team assigned to the social club. The street was quiet. A couple of early commuters walked past without looking. A delivery truck idled at the corner. The club door was closed. The windows were still dim. We waited for the signal that other teams were in position. Radios crackled softly, voices clipped and calm. Then the signal came. We approached the door and knocked. Not a dramatic bang, a firm knock, a clear announcement. Federal agents, search warrant, a pause. Movement behind the door, a lock turned. A man opened the door with sleepy irritation, as if we were interrupting a private routine. His irritation dropped when he saw the badges. His face shifted into a neutral mask too quickly, which is always a tell. People who are truly surprised look messy. We entered with steady steps. The interior smelled like coffee and stale smoke. Tables, chairs, a counter with cups stacked neatly. A backroom door partially closed. Two men sat at a table, frozen mid-motion, like the moment had been paused. One of them was Vito Marzano. His hair was combed, his shirt pressed, his expression calm enough to be insulting. He looked up at me like I had arrived slightly late to an appointment. "Morning," he offered, voice smooth. I did not answer the greeting. We were not here for social. We separated the occupants calmly, we identified everyone. We secured phones, we secured papers. We opened the back room with another agent and found what we expected to find. Not a treasure chest. Not a villain lair. Just notebooks, folders, receipts, and the tools of a business that did not want to be understood. The blue book was there. It was, in fact, blue. Dan would have enjoyed that detail. I did not smile. I just logged it. Evidence loves specifics. Vito watched us work with controlled patience. He did not yell. He did not plead. He wore his confidence like a coat. When we placed him under arrest, he did not resist. He asked a done question in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. Is this really necessary? The question was almost charming. Almost. I responded in the same calm tone we used all day. This is process. He nodded as if he respected process, which would have been funnier if it were not so practiced. Outside, the city was waking up. The block remained ordinary. People walked dogs. People carried coffees. A couple of kids ran toward a school bus. We escorted Vito to a vehicle without fuss. No shouting, no pushing, no scene. Indictment Day is not supposed to be a performance. It is supposed to be a hinge. In Brooklyn, the warehouse team reported similar calm. Doors opened, people complied, papers and records were secured. A safe was found and opened under proper procedure. Inside were cash bundles and a stack of money orders, none of it glamorous, all of it weighty. In Queens, the construction supply business was quieter than expected, like the building itself had decided to be innocent. Sal Mello was not there when the team arrived. That created the first sharp edge of the day. A missing target is not a disaster, but it is a problem that needs solving quickly. Dan called me from the Queens scene, voice low and tight. Sal is not here. We have staff, we have records, we have a warrant for him. He is not answering his phone. Melanie, hearing this, did not change her expression. She just adjusted the plan. Keep the scene secure, work the phone data, check known addresses, do not rush into anything sloppy. Sloppy is how people get hurt and how cases break. Within an hour, we had a location ping from a phone tied to one of Sal's associates. Not Sal himself, but close enough to suggest movement. The ping placed the associate in Midtown, near a hotel lobby Leonard had once mentioned. We sent a small team, quiet and fast. Marisol stayed focused on the witnesses. Indictment Day can trigger panic for people who have talked to her, even if no one has threatened them directly. Panic makes people break routines. Break routines makes people visible. She called Joseph Rinaldi and reached him at the bar before opening. He answered with a whisper, as if the walls had ears. Marisol kept her voice calm. Today is the day. You might hear rumors, you might see news. You do not need to do anything. You follow the plan. You call only the numbers we gave you. You keep the doors locked until you are ready to open. You are not alone. Joseph exhaled slowly. Thank you. It was a small exchange. It mattered. Leonard was already in a protected location, and the marshals confirmed he was steady. Not comfortable, steady. Priya handled the evidence chain with care. She tracked items recovered from each scene, labeled and sealed. Every document got logged. Every device got secured. On Indictment Day, the temptation is to feel triumphant. Triumphant people make mistakes. We could not afford mistakes. By late morning, the Midtown team reported success. The associate had been located in a hotel lobby, calm as a commuter, holding a small bag. When approached, he attempted a quick exit. Not a sprint, just a polite slip away. The team closed distance calmly and stopped him without a struggle. The bag contained documents and a phone. No drama, just objects with stories inside them. That phone led us indirectly to Sal. He had not fled the country. He had not vanished into smoke. He had done what many people do when they feel pressure. He had gone somewhere familiar, a family property in New Jersey, a place that felt safe because it had always been safe. The New Jersey team approached in the afternoon. The arrest was calm. Sal came out wearing a sweater and a look of practiced annoyance. He asked for a lawyer immediately. That was his right. We respected it. When he was in custody, the day eased slightly. The list of primary targets was now shorter in the way Melanie liked. Known locations, known status, known next steps. Back at the office, the hallway buzzed with a careful energy. Phones rang, evidence moved, interviews were scheduled. The building felt like a machine that had changed gears. Melanie gathered us briefly in the conference room. Her voice stayed steady, but there was a slight easing around her eyes. Good work, she noted. Clean entry, calm arrests, evidence secured. Now comes the part that lasts. Initial appearances, detention hearings, discovery, motions, and trial, unless they choose to plead. Dan sat down hard in a chair. So we traded street work for courtroom work. Melanie nodded. That is the exchange. It is not glamorous. It is justice. Priya added a practical note. We also have a wave of financial cleanup. Banks will want to know what happens next. Businesses tied to this will panic. Some will be victims, some will be complicit. Sorting that out matters. Marisol spoke softly, and the witnesses will need reassurance. Today will feel like the floor moved under them. Melanie agreed. We keep them steady. We keep them safe. We keep our tone consistent. The enterprise used calm control. We respond with calm clarity. That is how we win without becoming what we are fighting. In the late afternoon, I walked past the wall map. Someone had started to remove strings, not because the story was over, but because parts of it had moved from investigation to court. The map no longer needed to hold everything. The indictment now held the official outline. Dan stood beside me and rubbed his face. You know what is weird? I asked what. He pointed at a cluster of cards we had left up, the ones labelled victims. The bar, the dry cleaner, the auto body shop, the grocery. All those places are still there, he noted. They will open tomorrow. They will sell coffee and repair cars and clean shirts. The city keeps going. I nodded. That is why we do this, so the city can keep going without paying rent for peace. After dusk, I rode the subway home. The car was crowded with the usual mix. People scrolling newspapers, people holding grocery bags, people staring into space after long days. No one on the train knew what had happened in a social club that morning, or they knew in the vague way people know something from the radio but do not attach a feeling to it. The city absorbs events like rain. It gets damp, then it dries. At home I made tea and sat at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet. The radiator hissed. Outside, the city made its soft, restless sounds. I thought about Vito's calm greeting, about Sal's practiced annoyance, about Tommy's neighbour tone on the wire. A whole enterprise built on the idea that control can look like normal life. Indictment Day had interrupted that normal, not with fireworks, with paper and procedure and quiet determination. Before bed, I wrote one last note to myself. Today was not the end. It was the moment the story stepped into daylight. Then I turned off the light and let the room settle, hoping that somewhere a small business owner in Queens slept a little easier, even if they did not know why yet. Chapter 9. Trial as Slow Weather. Trial preparation began the way most serious things begin, with a calendar that did not care about feelings. Court dates landed like stones in a pond. Everything rippled outward from them, motions, hearings, witness prep, evidence review, more motions, more hearings. The work did not sprint. It trudged, steady, relentless, and oddly calm once you accepted that the pace was not yours to control. The case had moved from the wall map to boxes, actual boxes, evidence boxes with labels and seals and chain of custody forms that made every object feel like it had an official personality. Melanie kept reminding us of the same principle. Court is a language. We speak it carefully. Dan kept reminding us of a different principle. Coffee is a vitamin. We consume it responsibly, meaning constantly. Priya turned the financial story into something that looked almost simple. She built a timeline that did not rely on jargon. She used ordinary words. Cash in, transfer out. Invoice created, payment sent. Same people, same pattern. Her charts were so clean they looked innocent, which was exactly why they were persuasive. The defense teams filed motions that tried to cut holes in our story. They challenged searches. They challenged the monitoring. They challenged the idea that separate acts could be treated as one pattern. They challenged witness credibility. They challenged time itself, as if the calendar had lied. Melanie answered each motion with calm precision. She did not take bait. She did not perform outrage. She treated the process with respect, because respect is a weapon in court. It makes your opponents look like they are yelling at a wall. When jury selection began, the courthouse felt like a theatre where nobody wanted to admit it was a theatre. Potential jurors sat in rows and tried to look neutral, as if neutrality were a jacket you could put on and zip up. The judge ran the room like a person managing a busy train station. Orderly, firm, impatient with nonsense, patient with confusion. Melanie and the defense attorneys asked questions to test for fairness. Some people admitted they could not be impartial because they believed everyone charged was guilty. Some admitted they could not be impartial because they believed the government was always wrong. Some admitted they could not be impartial because they had a cousin who knew a guy who once dated a guy who had a story. Most people were just ordinary, They worked, they commuted, they raised kids, they paid bills. They did not wake up hoping to evaluate bank records for fun. Now they had to. A jury was seated. 12 people and a few alternates. They looked like a cross-section of the city, different ages, different backgrounds, different patience levels, all of them carrying the quiet burden of being asked to decide what truth looked like. Opening statements were calm. Melanie framed the case as a story of coordination, not a single act, a repeated method, an enterprise using legitimate fronts to support a pattern of crimes that produced money and silence. The defense framed the story as overreach. They argued the government was collecting unrelated events and calling it a pattern. They argued witnesses had incentives. They argued numbers can be interpreted many ways. They argued that men who drank coffee in a social club were not an enterprise, just a group of friends with bad hobbies. It was the normal dance. Two versions of reality placed side by side, and a jury asked to decide which quant held weight. Then the testimony began and the trial settled into its true shape. Slow weather. Eddie Kern testified about trucking paperwork. He explained how manifests were supposed to work, how routes were logged, how drivers signed, how documents should match. He explained how the system had been bent, not with a grand declaration, but with quiet pressure and repeated odd requests. Melanie kept her questions short, clear, grounded. She did not ask Eddie to be dramatic. She asked him to be accurate. The defense tried to paint Eddie as a disgruntled employee. Eddie responded like a man who wanted to go home and stop thinking about any of this. He admitted his own errors. He admitted he stayed quiet for too long. He admitted he was afraid. None of that helped the defense. Honest fear is easy for jurors to recognize. Joseph Rinaldi testified next. He looked uncomfortable in the witness chair, like the chair was too bright. Melanie asked him about the weekly payments, the way the visits happened, the calm tone of the collector, the way the collector knew details about his life. Joseph did not describe anything graphic. He did not need to. He described the feeling of being watched, the feeling of having your own bar become someone else's schedule. When the defense suggested he could have called the police earlier, Joseph answered with a tired honesty. He did not know if calling would help. He did not know if calling would make it worse. He wanted his bar to stay open. He wanted his family to feel safe. He chose the path that did not require courage he was not sure he had. That answer landed. It was not heroic. It was human. Mrs. Park testified, quiet voice, clear facts, the extra rent for peace, the collector with the neighbor tone, the weekly number, the subtle reminders. Her testimony was brief. It did not need to be long. Brevity can be powerful when it is clean. A few more witnesses followed. An employee from the answering service, a bank compliance officer who explained what patterns look like when you spend your life trying to spot them, a landlord who confirmed lease arrangements that made no sense as normal business and perfect sense as temporary infrastructure. Then came the records. Priya took the stand with an understated calm that made her dangerous in court. She walked the jury through the financial timeline. She explained how cash deposits were structured, how money moved through multiple accounts, how invoices were created in ways that did not match actual business activity, how the travel agency account behaved like a conduit, not a shop. She explained it without condescension. She did not assume people knew the language. She translated it. At several points you could see jurors lean forward slightly, not because they were entertained, because they were understanding. The defense tried to blur her story by suggesting alternative explanations. Maybe the businesses were just disorganized. Maybe they preferred cash. Maybe they were unlucky. Maybe the travel agency was a new business struggling to find customers. Priya responded with calm logic. New businesses still pay rent, still pay vendors, still have patterns of real commerce. What we see here is heavy movement and little substance, a river with no source and no destination that makes sense as travel. Dan later whispered that she could have been a professor. I told him she was, just with more subpoenas. The monitoring evidence entered carefully. Rachel testified about procedure, authorization, minimization, logging, chain of custody. She explained the care taken to stay within the legal boundaries. She did not sound proud. She sounded responsible. Then the portions of calls that were admissible were played. Calm voices, code words, scheduling, references to collections, reminders to keep books tidy, references to the blue book. It was not sensational, that was the point. Enterprises like this hide behind the ordinary. Ordinary audio can be devastating because it shows the machine operating without fear. Vito Marzano and Sal Melo sat at the defense table during these moments, faces composed. They did not react. They did not need to. Their posture was its own message. They wanted to look like people being inconvenienced by paperwork. The jury watched. The jury listened. The jury took notes. Leonard Greco was the witness everyone held their breath for, even if nobody admitted it. A cooperator is always a knife edge. A cooperator can connect the dots. A cooperator can also become a target for the defense. Motive, self-interest, credibility, all the classic attacks. Leonard took the stand and looked smaller than he had in our meetings. The courtroom does that. It removes your private bravery and asks you to make it public. Melanie approached him gently with questions designed to build a foundation. Who he was, what he did, what his job involved, how he became involved, what he saw. Leonard admitted his role. He did not try to float above it. He handled books, he processed transfers, he participated in the machinery. He also admitted he wanted a way out. He wanted safety. He wanted a future. Then he described the internal ledgers, the notebook, the blue book, the adjustment book, the weekly numbers, the way instructions came down, the way collections happened through Tony Perez, the way money moved through the same small set of businesses, the way paperwork was backfilled to make the flow look legitimate. He described the enterprise as a routine, not a dramatic conspiracy, a schedule, a set of roles, a structure that kept running because everyone knew what to do and what not to ask. The defense attacked hard. They suggested Leonard was lying to save himself. They suggested he invented stories because prosecutors like stories. They suggested he was resentful. They suggested he could not even remember dates clearly, so why trust any of it? Leonard responded with a steady humility. Dates blurred, places did not, methods did not, the ledger symbols did not, the names did not, the patterns did not. At that point the defense asked him why he really cooperated. Leonard paused, then offered the simplest thing he could say, in a room that demanded complicated motives. I wanted to go home and not be afraid. That answer did not sound rehearsed. It sounded like truth. The trial continued. Days blurred together. Evidence came in. Objections rose and fell like small waves. The judge ruled. The jury watched. The city outside kept moving. When closing arguments arrived, they felt less like fireworks and more like the last day of a long storm. Melanie summarized the story as a method and a pattern. She returned again and again to repetition. Same collectors, same businesses, same flow, same control, same victims paying piece rent. The defense argued doubt. They argued overreach. They argued that a lot of ordinary events had been braided into a rope by a government that wanted a bigger headline. They argued that people like Leonard had reasons to lie. They argued that coded calls could mean anything. In the end, it came down to whether the jury believed the ordinary events were separate or coordinated. The jury deliberated for days, not dramatic days, quiet days, the kind of days where everyone waits and pretends waiting is just another task. When the verdict came, the courtroom filled with a contained tension that still felt like soft weather. No one shouted, no one smiled widely. The judge asked whether the jury had reached a verdict. They had. The foreperson read, guilty on multiple counts for Vito Marzano and Sal Mello, including the enterprise and patent charges. Tony Perez was also found guilty on key counts. One lesser associate was found not guilty on a smaller count, which reminded everyone that juries are not machines. They decide each piece as they see it. Melanie closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. Relief, but controlled. The case had held. The defense lawyers wrote notes. The defendants sat still. Some looked angry, some looked blank. Vito Marzano looked annoyed, which was almost impressive given the moment. Outside the courtroom, the hallway filled with that strange post-verdict hush. Reporters waited with microphones. We did not. We avoided the cameras. Not because we were ashamed, but because the story was not about us. Marisol made calls to witnesses. Quiet updates, quiet reassurance. Some were relieved, some cried. Some did not react at all because their bodies had been holding fear for so long they no longer trusted relief. Later that night I walked home through streets that looked the same as always, a deli open late, a couple arguing about directions, a dog walker in a puffy coat. The city did not celebrate the verdict. The city did not know it was supposed to. That was fine. Justice is not a parade. It is slow weather. It changes the air little by little, until one day people realize they can breathe without paying rent for peace. Chapter 10. The Statute, the City, and the Quiet After. Sentencing day did not carry the same tension as verdict day. Verdict day is a cliff, sentencing day is a weight. The outcome is rarely a surprise, but the consequences still land with a dull thud. The defendants arrived in court dressed like men who wanted to look ordinary. That had always been part of the strategy. Ordinary faces, ordinary tones, ordinary routines. The enterprise hid in the familiar. Now the familiar sat under fluorescent courtroom light, waiting for a judge to assign an official cost. Melanie presented the government position in the same calm voice she had used since the beginning. She focused on harm without describing it in a way that would make the room heavy for the sake of heaviness. She focused on control, on repeated victimization, on the laundering that turned fear into usable money, on the way the enterprise reached across businesses and boroughs and states. The defense asked for leniency. They spoke about family. They spoke about good moments. They spoke about the idea that punishment should be measured. They spoke about their clients as humans. They were correct about one thing. The defendants were humans. That did not erase what they did. It just meant the system had to act like a system, not like revenge. A few victims submitted statements. Some were read, some were filed. Many people did not want to speak in court. They wanted the case to end so their lives could stop orbiting it. Joseph Rinaldi did not make a speech. He filed a short written statement. It said only that he wanted to work and raise his family without feeling watched. It said that peace should not require a weekly envelope. Mrs. Park filed a statement that thanked the government for listening, then asked for privacy. The statement was polite. It was also heartbreaking in its restraint. Leonard Greco did not speak at sentencing. He did not need to. His cooperation had already been poured into the record. He sat quietly with his case manager in the back row, eyes down, shoulders tense. The court process had given him a future, but the future was still carrying a cost. The judge imposed sentences, prison terms for the leaders, additional time for the collectors, financial penalties and forfeiture orders tied to proceeds and assets. Some properties would be sold, some accounts would be emptied by the government, not by thieves. The enterprise had used money as a tool. Now money became part of the remedy. Forfeiture is not glamorous. It is paperwork and auctions and compliance officers and the slow unwinding of ownership myths. It is also a message that control is not only about intimidation, it is about resources. Remove resources and the machine loses power. After sentencing, the case did not end, it shifted. Appeals were filed, motions appeared like weeds. Some arguments were technical, some were creative, most were expected. Melanie handled the post-trial work with steady patience. She did not treat appeals like insults. She treated them like part of the system. The system is allowed to check itself. That is the point. In the weeks after, our squad did the quiet work that no one makes documentaries about. We visited businesses that had been paying. We helped them connect with support programs. We coordinated with local police and inspectors to discourage new collectors from stepping into the empty space. We reviewed other open investigations for overlaps, because enterprises do not exist in isolation. They share people, they share habits, they share language. The social club storefront was closed. For a while it stayed dark. Then it opened again, but not as a club. The lease changed hands. Some entrepreneur turned it into a small cafe with decent espresso. It looked normal. It was normal. The block remained ordinary. That was the best outcome. Ordinary without the hidden tax. Daniel Leary handled the change like he always did, with sarcasm that covered relief. "I miss the old place," he complained one morning. It gave me purpose. I reminded him that purpose is cheap in New York. If you want more, you can walk outside and trip over it. He accepted that and complained anyway. Priya kept tracking financial echoes. Money does not stop moving because a trial ended. It reroutes. It finds new channels. Her work shifted toward prevention, identifying new patterns early, coordinating with banks, helping institutions understand what to look for without turning them into paranoid machines. Rachel returned to her steady wire room routine, now working different cases. She did not hold on to our story like it was personal. That was her professionalism. The work is constant. You cannot mourn every case or celebrate every win. You log, you maintain, you keep the procedure clean. Marisol kept in touch with witnesses, note forever, just long enough to ensure transitions were stable. She helped Joseph connect with local resources for security improvements that did not make his bar feel like a bunker. She helped Mrs. Park find a new supplier after the old one was revealed to be part of a pressure network. Mostly she helped people feel less alone in the aftermath. Leonard moved into a longer-term protected arrangement. He could not return to his old neighborhood. Not safely, not yet, maybe not ever. That is the part nobody advertises in a courtroom. Cooperation is not a shortcut to comfort. It is a trade. One afternoon, months after sentencing, I met Leonard in a quiet park upstate. Trees, grey sky, clean air that smelled like wet leaves. The marshal stayed at a distance, present but not hovering. Leonard looked different. Not happier exactly, just less hunted. He had a phone in his hand and a small smile that kept trying to fade. He turned the screen toward me. A picture of Walter. The dog was indeed mostly ears. The dog looked suspicious of the camera. The dog also looked like home. My sister brought him to visit, Leonard explained quietly. Not here. Not exactly here, but close enough. For a little while, he acted like I had been gone for 5 minutes and not months. Dogs do not keep ledgers. I told him that dogs are smarter than we are in the ways that matter. Leonard laughed, a small real laugh. Then his face tightened again, like he remembered he was not allowed to be too relaxed. I kept my voice steady. You did something hard. You helped stop a machine that was hurting people. You also lost a lot to do it. Both things can be true. Leonard nodded. I know. Sometimes I still wake up and think I have to go to the club with the books. Then I remember I do not. It is a strange kind of quiet. Quiet can feel unfamiliar when you have lived in noise. As I drove back to the city that evening, I thought about the statute again. Not as a headline, not as a symbol, as a tool built for a specific problem. One crime is easy to see. A pattern is harder. Enterprises survive because they split harm into pieces small enough to ignore. The tool we used forced the pattern into the open. It told the court and the city that separate acts can be connected when the connection is real and provable. It did not fix everything. Nothing fixes everything. It did, however, pull one machine apart. It returned some space to ordinary life. Back in Manhattan, I walked past the old social club location. The cafe inside had warm light and a quiet line of customers. A barista moved quickly, making espresso and handing cups across a counter without fear. Nobody stood watch at the door, nobody scanned the street, no one asked for a weekly number. It was, in a small way, beautiful. Dan called me that night to complain about a different case. He used the same tone he always used, half irritated, half invested. He asked if I missed the old days. I told him I did not miss the old days. I missed the idea that finishing a case means you are finished with the work. He understood. The work keeps coming. The city keeps producing stories. Before bed, I wrote one last note in my notebook, not for court, not for anyone else, just for myself. The calm after is not empty. It is a space people fill with ordinary things. Then I turned off the light. The radiator made its familiar hiss. The city outside murmured and muttered and kept living. Somewhere, a small business owner locked up without checking the sidewalk twice. Somewhere, a dry cleaner counted cash without calculating who else might want it. Somewhere, a dog named Walter snored like a truck and did not care about ledgers at all. The statute had done what it was built to do. The city, as always, kept going.